Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers, and in this video we're taking a first look at a brand new addition to the Garmin Forerunner lineup. We have got the Forerunner 165. It's a new GPS running watch that slots in between the Forerunner 55 and the Forerunner 265. It's the cheapest watch in Garmin's lineup to now pack a sharp, bright AMOLED touchscreen. Now we've been testing it ahead of the launch and we're here to give you our initial impressions. There will be a full review up on the channel later, so don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to hear when that lands. But for now, here's our first look, first run impressions of the new Garmin Forerunner 165 and the Forerunner 165 Music. So first up, some quick specs and some key details then. Well, we asked for it, but Garmin hadn't revealed the full spec sheet at the time of recording. But here is what we know ahead of launch about the Garmin Forerunner 165 and 165 Music. So let's start with the price. Well, there are two models of the Forerunner 165. There's the 165 regular, which is priced at $249.99 in the UK, $299.99 in the US. The Forerunner 165 Music is $289.99 in the UK, $349.99 in the US. For context, the Forerunner 55 is £180, the 265 is £430, the Forerunner 255 is £300, and the Coros Pace 3 is £219. On design, you've got a pretty standard Garmin with a 44mm case. It's slightly bigger than the Forerunner 55. You've got the familiar 5-button setup and quick release swappable silicone straps. It weighs in at a lightweight 40 grams, but the headline really is this 1.2-inch colour touchscreen AMOLED display that brings that smartwatch style bright, crisp, lively display to the lower end of watches for the first time, if you can call £250 lower end. Battery life is shorter than you'll find on a Forerunner 55 or a 265 or a 255 or the Pace 3. On paper you get 19 hours of GPS runtime. Smartwatch battery life is listed as 11 days. That's also shorter than all those other options I've just mentioned, and that will drop once you start using the music on the music version as well. When it comes to GPS, there's no multiband here, just regular all systems GPS. If you want dual frequency, you'll have to upgrade to a Forerunner 265 or consider the Pace 3 as a rival option. The Music Edition offers offline storage and playback for apps like Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, those kind of things, those third-party services. There's also smarts like Garmin Pay, contactless payments on both watches, and the usual smartphone notifications, those general things that you'll find on a Garmin. On features as well, you're going to get pretty much that comprehensive lineup of Garmin's health, fitness and connected features. That includes everything from like 25 sport profiles to running power and running form metrics on the wrist. There's adaptive training plans. Pace Pro, which provides runners with grade adjusted pace guidance based on the course elevation that you're racing or your route you're running. You can also create and send routes to follow on your watch, but we're assuming there's no offline mapping here, though we weren't had those details confirmed. You'll also have access to things like Garmin's morning report, tells you how you're feeling in the morning, body battery, blood oxygen monitoring, sleep tracking and nap detection. Now there are some important omissions though. Training readiness and training status are not here. There's no triathlon mode either. It's also worth noting that everything is identical between the 165 and the Music aside from that additional music. There's also Wi-Fi connectivity on the Music models but not on the regular 165. Onto the run test then, and let's start with the design. I tested the Forerunner 165 Music, and this is pretty much Garmin standard fare in terms of the build. You've got kind of cheaper materials here overall, but that keeps things nice and light, and it's an okay looking watch overall. The AMOLED screen really though is the hero, no doubt about that. And it's a clear step up from your sort of regular displays that you're getting on older watches, to the point where people who've noticed this watch on my wrist comment on the screen. It's bright, it's lively, it's crisp, it's very easy to read in all conditions. It's maybe not as punchy and vibrant as the 965, and you are sacrificing battery life here for the pleasure of that bright screen, but it's still a big tick in the box if that's something you've been looking for on your running watches for a while. And overall, I found this a happy watch to wear. It feels compact, it's pretty disappearing on the wrist, the strap is fuss-free to get a good fit, it feels nice and strong and robust as well. The screen real estate is ample in terms of all your stats. The touchscreen and buttons are nicely responsive. The software is snappy and generally speedy and easy to navigate. There's also a good level of customization here on this watch, from your run data screens to your glances and all those things. You know, Garmin has gotten really good at offering customization overall.
So I like the design of the Forerunner 165. It's a very familiar look and feel to anyone who's used any of the Garmin Forerunner range, really. You've got the 5 buttons, which are very easy to use to navigate the menus and use on the run when you're sweaty or it's rainy or something like that. And the AMOLED screen is really nice. It's comparable to the ones on the more expensive Garmins. The touchscreen is nice and responsive, and yeah, it's just a nice little upgrade to the lower end of the Forerunner line to have that AMOLED screen on there. Obviously, the price hasn't really dropped to the entry-level price of the other Garmin Forerunners, but it is the cheapest AMOLED Forerunner, and it looks and feels the part as a proper running watch with that AMOLED screen at the lower price point than things like the Forerunner 265. It's also very light and comfortable to wear 24/7. I've had it on the whole time, when sleeping and stuff like that, and yeah, it's a really nice, comfortable watch to use all the time.
When it comes to battery life in these initial tests, I got to put the Forerunner 165 Music through a full battery life cycle. So I took it off charge 100%, used it till it died. I got 8 days usage with training. That included 4.5 hours of GPS runtime. I also ran the Barcelona half marathon with Brooks in 1 hour 25, and that burned 11% battery life. A 1 hour run burned 6%, and the average overnight burn on this watch was around 3%, which is pretty standard. No trouble there at all. It's also worth noting that during my tests, I had the screen brightness set to full. The always-on display was off during general use, but on during workouts. And I had screen timeout set to 15 seconds. We weren't able to connect to Garmin Connect, so there's no notifications mashed up into that battery life in there, which can speed up the battery drain. I also think for those running or training half a dozen times a week, you're basically likely to be charging this watch once a week overall based on those settings, which is, it's okay, not great, but okay.
And then battery life, it's been okay. So we've not got this link to Garmin Connect yet ahead of the embargo, so I haven't had notifications coming in, but on the run I've seen basically about a 5% drop per hour with GPS battery life, which is equivalent obviously to 20 hours. That's pretty good. That's across several runs of different lengths, including 1 over 2 hours. A pretty consistent rate of drop off during runs, and that's fine. 20 hours of GPS is okay for a watch this size. As there are watches that will last a lot longer these days if you're not going to have that AMOLED screen, even of this size, so it's not going to be a strong point for the watch, but I don't think it holds it back. You've got the AMOLED screen. It is a lightweight small watch, but you are still getting decent battery life on the run, and then outside the run, probably been charging it twice, so it's about every 5 days or so I've had to charge it. I'd say we'll get a bit more accurate data on that once we've got notifications coming in, though, because those do sometimes reduce the battery life a little bit. But I would say, broadly speaking, I think the battery life is okay for the brightness and the impressiveness of the screen you're getting here. I've had the screen always on, by the way, for it as well. So if you don't have it always on, you can extend that outside of training battery life a fair bit. But I like to have the screen always on because that's one of the joys of using this watch. And it doesn't really mean you're going to have to charge it every 2 days like a smartwatch or anything like that. It still lasts pretty well. So I do think the battery is pretty good for a watch of this size with a nice bright screen.
GPS, I tested the GPS accuracy up against the Garmin Enduro 2's dual band mode at the Barcelona half marathon. I have to say that the Forerunner 165 without that dual band still did remarkably well. Overall on distance, the 165 hit up 13.29 miles. The Enduro came back with 13.29 miles as well. And when you dig into the tracks, there are only a few sections where the 165 deviates slightly. Otherwise, a very close match for the Enduro 2. On my half a dozen other runs, it's been a close match for the Enduro 2 in those overall distances as well, and the maps. So in those early tests, I think there are some really positive signs for the GPS tracking accuracy on this watch. Just a cheaper watch for it, even without that dual band.
The accuracy front, the GPS has been pretty good. Obviously, it's a shame you don't get the dual band mode on here like you do on the Forerunner 255, which is kind of an equivalent price but doesn't have the AMOLED screen. It's kind of Garmin picking and choosing features to put on different watches, but the accuracy has been pretty good. I've been testing it against the Garmin Epix Pro throughout the time I've had with the Forerunner 165. I've done a lot of running in that time, and overall I found that the 165 has matched up pretty well to the Epix Pro, even under tree cover or doing tight little loops. It tends to be slightly generous, I find, on pacing, so it gives me a little bit more distance than the Epix Pro. But over the course of this week, where I've done just about 125 kilometers, it's added up to about a 700 meter difference to the runs the Epix Pro has tracked compared to the runs tracked by the Forerunner 165. So it's not a big deal. You look on the GPS traces from some runs, you can see it maybe being a bit wider, not necessarily always getting you on the right side of the road, giving you a little bit of extra distance when you go around corners, that kind of thing. But I think GPS is pretty accurate. No dual band mean the battery life's a bit better. It's a shame not to have that option, though, I think, to use occasionally. But yeah, I haven't had a problem with GPS so far. It's been fine.
Now, when it comes to heart rate accuracy, I put the 165 optical heart rate tracking up against the Polar H10 tethered to my Enduro 2, and the accuracy here was surprisingly good as well. During the half marathon, it was great. It clocked my average at 158 BPM, my max at 175. The H10 did 158 for average, and my max was a couple beats higher at 177. There's no crazy spikes or crazy anomalies in the data too. For that half marathon, it was pretty consistent. And while I won't say it matched the heart rate strap beat for beat, it wasn't too far off. really good performance on that one test. I also did a session with 6x3 minute at Hertie pace, again with the H10 and Enduro combo up against the 165 optical, and the optical did a pretty solid job here too. It tracked the intervals and the intensity of those intervals and the rises really closely compared to the H10. Not too many signs of lag and lurch, which you can sometimes get. Did have a tendency to read 3 to 5 beats higher for some small sections once I was hitting the top paces, but on the whole, wasn't a million miles away from the chest strap. And I'd say, as with the GPS, so far, the optical sensor here has performed really very well. I'm quite impressed.
Heart rate accuracy hasn't been great. I've had a lot of runs where it's been really bad. I did 120 miler with the watch where it just read, it had my cadence the whole time. So basically I should have been dead by rights given my heart rate that high. The heart rate was higher than my max heart rate for the entirety of a 20-mile run, so over 2 hours. And yeah, that's not good. And a few things like that. Obviously, you've now got the training stuff on the watch, things like training effect. And although there's not a lot of training analysis on the watch, if you want to use those features, which are one of the big things to add to this watch at the lower end, you need accurate heart rate data. So do a few more, bit more testing. I'll probably link up the chest strap for a while, try and get a bit more use out of the training effect ahead of our full review. But yeah, heart rate's been hit and miss. Like some runs have been completely wrong, some have been okay, some have read up and down. Sometimes it's been cadence lock. It's more or less what you expect from an optical heart rate sensor. A lot of the time it will be fine, but especially in the winter, it won't necessarily be that accurate. And I would use a chest strap if you're going to use any of the training info on the watch, or indeed do runs based on heart rate.
Verdict then, in my early test, I've been pretty impressed with the 165 music. The heart rate and GPS accuracy looks solid. The AMOLED display aside, that design and build are basic, but light and comfortable. There's a nice compact disappearing feel to it. It's nice to wear on the wrist. I think some people will enjoy the fact the screen is a bit smaller. The screen's also great, and that's definitely going to appeal to a lot of runners. I'm not so keen on trading the battery life for that screen quality. I think I'd prefer to have battery, but that's all about priorities. And for most people, there's still enough juice on the battery here to tackle most things. It'll easily cater for a marathon, for example, and it'll probably even take you up to a 100k Ultra. What I think is interesting here, though, is that Garmin pushed the 265 price way up not long ago, and this watch now almost slots in at the price of the old 255. So if you're not bothered by the screen and the music, I think you might be better off looking at a Forerunner 255. Packs a better battery life and you get dual band GPS. You can also find deals on that now as well. If you're happy to look outside the Garmin stable, the Coros Pace 3 would be another really good alternative here. Again, there's no AMOLED display on that watch, but you do get dual band GPS and a much longer battery life.
So verdict is that this is another strong watch release from Garmin. Like, they are very good at basically picking price points and features to put on watches to make sure that they are, they're not cheap by any means, but they're not so expensive that it's completely out of the realms of possibility. So it does make it quite. Oh, Taz has popped up in the background there. Here comes Kaz. What was I saying? It's a tricky one. It's not as cheap as I hoped. Basically, that's nearly always the case with watches like this from Garmin. You think in entry level, you might be looking at more like the Forerunner 55 pricing. That's not the case. Basically, it's just a fair bit cheaper than the Forerunner 265, losing a few features. A couple of the key ones being dual band GPS and training readiness and more insightful training analysis all round. And those aren't absolutely necessary. I think the dual band GPS is a bit of a shame because I do like dual band GPS, and you do get it at watches around this price, things like the Coros Pace 3 or Garmin's Forerunner 255. Obviously, no triathlon mode here as well, which will be a big loss to people who are triathletes. But I'm not a triathlete, so that's not a big loss for me. But yeah, it's in that awkward position of being, it's not as cheap as I'd like, but it's not wildly out of whack for the market at large, because for an AMOLED screen with this quality of sports tracking, you're not really seeing that elsewhere from other brands. Garmin have got some other kind of more in their smartwatch stable, things like the Venue Square, but they are not as good a sports tracker as the Forerunner 165. They haven't got all the buttons, they haven't got even the limited training analysis on this, and so yeah, it does stand out in its price bracket, I think, as a really good option. But you certainly can get cheaper options. If you're not too fussed about the AMOLED, you can see things like the Coros Pace 3 or the Forerunner 255 from Garmin. You're going to get dual band GPS, you're going to get better battery life, and you are getting really fantastic run tracking watches there that just don't have the AMOLED screen. So it's a lot comes down to, as always, whether you're going to pay for the AMOLED screen. But I do think it's a pretty brilliant little watch, and one that Garmin needed, a cheaper AMOLED option, because the 265 is so expensive and so much more expensive than the 2X5 line used to be, and now this kind of replaces that 245 priced watch, which obviously was one of the most popular watches and still is. And I think you're now getting a watch at that price with those features now with the AMOLED screen. And it's just a shame Garmin shaved off a couple of features that I like on their more expensive watches, but that's always going to be the case with the way Garmin's Forerunner lineup works. It's very much a tick box on which feature you're going to get for which price. But all round, I do think it merits its price tag, but I do wish it had come in a little bit cheaper to really be a bit more of a slam dunk.
So there you have it. That's been our first impressions of the Garmin Forerunner 165. We'll have a full review up on the channel in the coming weeks once we've done more thorough testing. So make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell to hear when that video lands. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure to walk you through this brand new watch and give you our first thoughts on our early tests. Now, if you're interested in the Coros Pace 3, which we've mentioned here, there's a video that you should watch appearing on the channel just about now. Otherwise, it's been great to chat to you. Thanks for watching as ever, and we hope to see you again soon on the Run Testers. Happy running, everyone.